Seven, six, five, four, three, two, one.
You'll never have the sacred stone.
Oh, this you crazy mother.
Welcome to Innovating a Game Changer podcast. I'm your innovator, Nevarda Smith, and today I'm going to bring you an overview of innovation and how do you transform your organization using workshops so you can be more innovative. This is your innovation station, and I'm your innovator, Nevarda Smith. Welcome back to Innovating a Game Changer podcast. I'm your innovator, Nevarda Smith. And as I said before, we're actually going to go through the process of giving you an overview of how to transform your organization into one that's an innovative culture and the processes that I use through workshops to drive that forward. So let's get started with that. Okay, so most people as they go, or most organizations as they go through this particular process, they start to look at what it is that they need to be building out. So they normally start with what's called an innovation funnel concept. Now, each organization is going to have different names for this, but the idea is as you move through this process, you're trying to continue to reduce two things. You want to reduce your expenses so you can hit the mark as what it is from a customer value perspective. The customer is always right. The customer is going to buy your product. You want to make sure you're delivering customer values. So you want your expense to be such that you want to be making sure that you're not spending as much money as you would be otherwise through a waterfall approach where you've only got that one release cycle at the end of it, and then you determine whether or not there's an actual market for your product or not. The second one is really you want to be about reducing risks, right? So as you're going through the process, you want to go through so that you're reducing the risk. Again, by focusing in on customer value here, you're going to gain the feedback that keeps the cone of uncertainty. You can also look at this as a cone of uncertainty as well, making sure that you're staying within the funnel and driving towards that customer value, which is represented by this dot at the end of it here, is exactly what the customer wants because you've got that feedback process coming through here. And this is reducing your risk as you're going through the funnel process. So it all starts with ideation, and ideation is the process of gathering those ideas and determining which ideas you want to move down through the stack or down through the funnel. Now, ejecting an idea here is very, very low cost because you're going to go out there and you're going to focus in on the customer value again. You're going to have defined your personas for your organization, and you're going to use an ideation management tool such as Idea Scale. Now, Idea Scale allows you to set out a challenge to the individuals in your organization and review those challenges and have a collaboration going between the different employees in your organization to make sure that you're getting that feedback and those loops of collaborations going round and round and round, and the ideas getting better and better and better. On top of that, it allows you to prioritize and select the ideas that you want to move down through the particular funnel. The next one is really the define stage, and this is where the workshops come in. So after you've done an ideation challenge and you've identified the 2 or 3 ideas that you're going to bring down through the funnel, you want to workshop those ideas. Now, there's 3 types of workshops that I actually do, and all of them are focused in on the customer challenges, the customer personas that you're dealing with. So a lot of work has gone in before you've even opened up the challenge to identify those particular customers that have a particular problem that you're trying to solve here. And the 3 workshops, which we'll get into later, are the Google Ventures 5-day design sprint, there's a 1-day ideation acceleration, and there's a 1-day business model canvas that ends in a Shark Tank. So how do you get the measurement? How do you get the feedback? Well, you want to still keep putting a product out to the market. So at this point, after you've gone through the workshop, you're either going to have a prototype that can go out to the market to get that feedback, or you've got a set of MVP that you're actually going to be building to push out to the market very, very quickly to get that feedback again. Failure at this stage is always an option, and it's never bad because it's much better to have spent maybe $10,000, $15,000 to get to this point only to eject the idea, knowing that the feedback from the market that you measured now wasn't exactly what you were hoping. There might not have been adoption for it. Maybe your information was a little bit off and that customer value wasn't there. But it's much better to eject it here rather than going to full scale, which most waterfall projects actually do, only to go out to the market and then get that feedback that says, that the market doesn't want it. Now, I find a lot working with startups, this becomes a real problem. The startup operator believes that they've got the best idea and they want to drive it forward, so they spend millions of dollars or hundreds and thousands and millions of dollars to drive that product all the way out with a set of what they believe is the minimal viable product, but they've never actually gone to the market and figured out whether the MVP is actually needed. I've seen $300,000 and $400,000 spent on a particular feature that is actually never used by the customer. Had you done 3-5 interviews with an actual customer using a prototype, you would have got that feedback and you would have known, yep, let's save that $400,000 to invest it elsewhere in the particular feature sets that we're building here. So again, it's great to eject ideas at this stage, knowing that the measurements and the customer feedback is not there. The next one is really analyzing. Again, you're focusing on the customer value. The customer is king at this point. Market feedback is not optional, right? So you want to drive those feedback. So if you've got an existing product that's out in the market, you're driving new feature sets into it, you want to get that feedback from the customer to drive that into your next sets of sprints. I always use SAFe 4.5 PI planning to do this and take the next set of features based on customer feedback into the PDCA cycle, which is the plan, do, check, and adapt cycle. I do a lot of A/B testing where we'll build out 2 prototypes, or we'll build out 2 feature sets slightly differently, and we'll release one feature set to a group of existing customers, and we'll release another feature set to a secondary group of customers. Very, very minimal feature set at that point. We get that feedback to which feature set looked better or which implementation of the particular feature actually worked better, and then we drive that forward into the product and move that forward, and that's called A/B testing, and I do a lot of that with my customers. When you actually get to a stage where you want to implement it with a pilot group, this is really where you're going to identify about 100 customers, and it could be an existing set of customers. It could be going out to market to identify a beta test group that you're going to put this in on. But the whole point is to identify that pilot group to get that initial feedback. Now, by this stage, you've rapidly iterated through this process. Your expenses gone up a little bit, but again, at this point, if the customer's showing that these particular features aren't needed, then you can always eject the idea or take it back through the cycle again to do a better another Google Ventures 5-day design sprint, or take it back to the design stage to refine it again based on the customer feedback, or take it back into analyze and figure out why it's not grabbing the traction that you really want it to do. Principles of SAFe 4.5 really help in this point, and this helps you also grab a pulse of the market. Again, speaking to the customer at each one of these stages is ultimately important. I always have at least 5 customers before I move on to the next cycle here, or the next part of the innovation funnel. I always control everything that I do with SAFe 4.5, and the reason I do that is because it's an agile process that scales at an enterprise level, and it really allows us to do things like A/B testing and continually driving a culture of innovation into the organization, because every 10 weeks we're actually going through at least one of these ideation challenges and driving the next set of features into the product. We always kick off these challenges and we repeat them and repeat them and repeat them. One gotcha here is really about the limiting the work in progress. I typically don't have in an organization more than 3 ideas active inside of the funnel at any one point in time. And the reason you want to do this is because you want to drive it through the funnel as fast as possible. You want to get out to market and get that feedback from the customer as fast as possible. Now, if you're splitting your talents over 3 or 4 or more ideas that are going through, 6 or 7, then you're not going to be able to drive it through the funnel as much. There's going to be too much work in progress, and it's going to jam up that funnel and stop you actually getting things out to market. Because the end goal of any innovation funnel is really to push it out to the market as fast as possible. And if we look at this in this cycle in terms of weeks, we want to be spending an ideation week, a define week, and a measurement week, an analyzing week to improve the product, maybe going through another prototype cycle, and then no more than 2 or 4 weeks during the implementation cycle to get that first product out to market at the implementation stage. And then, of course, you're continually controlling it with doing A/B testing, pulling the best of breed features back into the product as you move forward. So the innovation process that I use is basically split up into two sides. You've got the blue side here, which is really handling the ideation side. That's the ideation management side. And the rest of the side is really about workshopping and pushing it out to the market to get that customer feedback. So it starts off with knowing your customer. Then you launch the challenge and you move through to the ideation entry, which is where where your employees are pulling all that in. Then you've got an examination sprint, which you're basically looking at all those ideas, digesting them and determining which ones you want to move forward with. And we'll talk a lot about that in detail as we get into the different sections here, and we prioritize as well. Workshops, those 3 workshops that I talked about. There's a Shark Tank prep deck, which is based on the business model canvas to get the information out about what venture capitalists and executives are interested in. There's the ideation acceleration workshop that takes an idea through the process when you know what you want to do. And of course, the Google Ventures design sprint, which is the best of all worlds because it does all of that in one single week of 5 days. Customer feedback, again, is driving towards the market value here. Very, very important. And then we end at the end of this with how do we create a strategy for implementation and growth. So the first one's really about knowing your customer. So now we've moved back to the ideation stage, which could be called the discovery phase. And you want to know what your customer is doing. You want to know the challenge areas of those customers. So you should have had a set of interviews already with some of the target customers. And you want to build a set of personas around those customers. You name them. In this case, I've got Peggy, Sean, and Samantha. And those will be the starting point. But everybody should know what Peggy's age is, what her income is, what challenges she faces on a daily basis, as they should with Sean and Samantha. I typically print out these things on poster-sized paper, and I get them up on the walls all around the office so that as you're walking down, you're going to run into Peggy and Sean and Samantha at all times. I also put a lot of what would Peggy say, or what would Peggy do, what would Sean do, what would Samantha do, and then I put some interesting questions about the challenge areas that those specific customers are into, so that it keeps people thinking about those with a customer focus. So much of our time during IT development in the past has really been just focusing in on what it is that we're trying to build, and typically there was a single SME that was driving that feature forward, and it might not have had the customer value that SME did. But when you bring your team together from a collaboration perspective and they know their customer intimately, then they're going to be driving all solutions forward to solve those customer challenges that they're dealing with, that these particular customers are dealing with on a daily basis. So the next thing is you launch the challenge. So you've got to define that challenge problem and you send it out to the employees. And I use a tool called Ideascale, and you can find that at ideascale.com. And that tool allows me to take the entire ideation management into a single place. So I engage the employees before the challenge comes up. I let them know it's about to kick off. And then when it kicks off, they get an email to be able to go through and actually put their ideas into the tool. The tool manages that for me. I open it up only for 1 week, and the reason I do this is because any more than 1 week, you tend to lose urgency. 1 week, it drives that urgency and drives that daily engagement. I can continually send out emails from the tool to allow them that it's still going. A daily report comes out as well with that, so that people can see who's winning the challenges and who's not, who's winning from a collaboration perspective, and whose ideas are winning. So you can start to see that really drive the competition amongst each of the team members. Now, I always give out awards. So $75 for the person who's contributed the most ideas, the most thumbs up, the most collaboration inside of the tool itself. The tool will actually measure, gives you a certain number of points for an idea. Every time you vote, you get some points. Every time you respond to an idea, you get some points. So you can really drive the value to an individual all the way up, and that allows us to pick the superstars from that and give them an award. $75 for the winner, $50 for the second person, and $25 for the third person. On top of that, I also give $75 to each of the people that actually get their idea selected to move forward into the actual next phases of the development or the innovation funnel. And what that does is it again gives them an incentive to come to actually go and make sure that they're putting all their ideas. Also, as an award there, I actually bring that person in who is now the SME, the one that put the idea into the tool, and bring it through and actually allow them to do the workshops. Idea entry, we talked a little bit about this. Employees are putting their ideas into it, and people are becoming collaborative, and they're thumbing up or thumbing down the ideas. This allows prioritization inside of the tool to happen naturally, although you do want to examine all the ideas, which is in the next phase. So you want to be examining all those ideas so that you can pick those special ideas that really didn't get voted up. Maybe there's something that came in very, very late in the challenge itself and didn't necessarily get the number of votes to drive it to the top. So you want to examine all those ideas, and then you want to have open discussions with leaders of the organization to make sure that you're trying to and you're focusing on those best ideas. So not necessarily does the winning idea in the tool always go through. 90% of the time it does. Occasionally you're going to get a couple of ideas that don't go down. The next thing is you want to prioritize those ideas. So you want to select the top 10 ideas, and those could be made up of, maybe the 6 ideas that were actually at the top of the stack as far as the number of votes that went on. And then you want to take a look at maybe 4 ideas that are not necessarily at the top of the stack. You want to get down to a point where you're shortlisting 2 or 3 ideas to actually workshop. You can do 1 idea as well, but 2 or 3 is a really good number to go into a set of workshops. So then you've got something to compare against from an investment perspective. If you're bringing 3 ideas that have gone through workshops to an executive team or a venture capitalist to move those ideas forward, that's a good way to do it. So the workshop offerings are really the workshop 1, which is the Shark Tank Prep. The next one's the Ideation Acceleration, and the third one's the Google Ventures Design Sprint. And those are the 3 that I typically run. Google Ventures Design Sprint is really the best of the breed here because it's a 5-day process, and we'll talk about that a little bit further on. So the Shark Tank Prep is based on the business model canvas by a gentleman named Osterwilder. And you can go out on the internet and find his business model canvas. So once you get expert at business model canvas, you can actually extract that stuff and move each one of those sections of the business model canvas excuse me, into a actual workshop activity or workshop round where you can drive a set of activities that are going to drive down the answers for that particular part of the business model. The good thing about the business model canvas is it's something that's been proven to answer all the questions that an executive or leadership in the organization is after to know whether or not they want to invest in the particular idea. And it's also good for venture capitalists because, again, it gives them everything that they need to make a determination of whether they want to fund this thing to move forward. So the purpose itself is to gain the funding for the next phases in the innovation funnel, or gain the funding to actually move this forward into the market itself. This also gives a workshop also gives the ability to engage in an innovation culture. If you're doing this stuff constantly, I'm running these things every 10 weeks. I'm also running these things independently as well, but at least every 10 weeks in your organization, you want that innovation cycle to go through, and that drives that innovation culture and lets your employees know that it is very, very important that we're going to be an innovative company so that we can continue to thrive. The next one's the Ideation Acceleration. This is really an IT discovery process. I constructed this because I've been in so many organizations for so many years where it could take 3 months to 6 months to actually get everybody on the same page before you could start development. And that was typically the generating of the requirements of what it was that you were going to build. And I used to sit on so many meetings where the same BA would read the same thing over and over again and maybe just get a little bit further on, and you have 40 or 50 people on the call, and I know they weren't participating because the questions keep coming up. Same questions were being answered over and over again. So the purpose of this is a 1-day intensive program that brings all of those people that need to be involved into a room, and we actually allow them to know what the idea is that we're trying to build here, know, most importantly, who the persona is and why we're building the particular product. And it's really aligning the team goals there and defining the MVP. It's breaking down features and acceptance criteria for those MVP so that everybody through activities is getting on the same page. And that's what's most important. So I can typically get, even though it's an expense to fly everybody into one location, I can typically save the organization, get them to a point that normally takes 3 months in a single day intensive. It also gets a good collaboration among those team members because now they get to meet each other, which may not happen in a large enterprise organization that's distributed all over the world. If you do have international flights here, A good way to do it also, if you've got offshore development teams, is actually just bring them in on Skype, have a facilitator over there that's running them through the activities on that side as you're doing on this side, and then have those high-definition cameras actually videoing both sides. And I put them on a really, really large screen, so it almost feels like they're actually here, but they're not necessarily. It's not as good as having them here, but it works really well as well to get those either those Google Hangouts or those Skype sessions up and running so that you can get the cameras to move around and see exactly what's going on both sides of the shores. The last thing that the purpose is really gaining team commitment here. So everybody, before they walk away, agrees that this is the MVP. They agree that the action items walking out of this, and they can move then into PI planning, or say 4.5 PI planning sessions, so they can actually drive out the next 10 weeks that they're going to do to build this product, with an intent to get a product out to market in the next 2 to 4 weeks. The first product, the first part of that MVP is what you want to get out there, and that allows you to bootstrap stuff moving forward. The last one is the Google Ventures Design Sprint, and this is really focused in on the customer value. So you may have an idea that you don't know whether or not the customer wants it or not. I've got other podcasts out there that you can take a look at if you're interested in the Google Ventures Design Sprint, where I take you in detail day by day. But at a high level, it's a 5-day process. It's spending 6 hours a day with an intensive program, and this is really when you need to vet the market about a value of the idea before you go out. So on Monday, you map, you ask the SMEs, and you focus in on the end state. On Tuesday, you remix the ideas that were coming up in that session, and they may have started with something that went through the innovation funnel. They may be brand new itself. You want to look at how you can improve that, and you want to start to sketch that out. The next day, you take a look at those sketches that each person did. They're blind at that point. We don't know who created each sketch, and then you decide on which portions of the sketches or which parts of the sketch you're going to take forward, and then you storyboard that out. So you've got a really good customer persona flow of the customer journey. On Thursday, you spend all that day just actually prototyping it. I've had a lot of success with a lot of online prototyping tools. They're getting very, very easy to use. So even if I don't have technical people in the room, even people that are non-technical are able to use those and come up with a realistically looking prototype that actually can be utilized in front of the customer. And then Friday is the all-important end state, which tells you whether or not there's actually customer value in what you're doing. It's 2 rooms. In one room, you've got your team taking a look at what's going on in the one-on-one interviews. In the other room, those one-on-one interviews have got cameras on those individuals' faces. They've also got cameras on the tool or the prototype as they're going through it, so that we can see what's happening. The 10 or so people in the other room are actually using post-it notes to identify facial expressions or confusions, or maybe some feedback from those customer interviews. They're going to tell you whether or not you're onto customer value, or whether you're really close. And then that comes back through a feedback loop as well. So then the last thing is the customer value, right? So you always want to be focusing on the customer value. I say it over and over again. It doesn't matter what you think about an idea personally. The end result is whether or not the customer is going to get value out of that product to even use it. So therefore, you've got to focus in on the customer, and you want to get that customer feedback as much as possible. You want your underlying architecture to give you those feedbacks through those analytics tools that allow you to identify customer drop-offs, customer usage cycles, and things like that. But you also want to interview those customers, so you want to continue to get this customer feedback over and over again. Also, this allows you to put out an MVP and use the income, the bootstrapping income from that, from the previous sprints, to actually drive the feature set moving forward. I always use an example here of where Pokemon Go came out, and that was a great experience for everybody, but the servers got overwhelmed, so they stopped doing development on the tooling itself or the game itself, and they moved over to try and build out the infrastructure that would allow them to continue to expand the growth cycle. It would have been much better for those guys to fix the bugs in the problem in the actual tool and restrict the number of people that could get in, rather than open it up to everybody else, because by the time they got back to the feature sets, the customer market had already moved on, the value had already moved on, and they weren't meeting the needs of their customers, and therefore the cycle dropped off. The number of the growth of it actually dropped right off. And they could have done a lot better had they actually been releasing product and limiting the number of people that were going in there. Safe 4.5 calls this the PDCA cycle, where you constantly do plan, do, check, and adapt. And the adapt is really the customer feedback that's coming back. And you want to drive those new features or those changes or those improvements back in through the system, back through these feedback loops. The last thing is really the strategy of DevOps. So you are not able to move quickly using enterprise waterfall or even an enterprise agile approach unless you've got the underlying architecture of a DevOps. This allows you to drive the unit testing, the security, and automated testing to the forefront. So as a developer checks their code in, that code, they're going to become better developers because these tools are checking their code and letting them know that they're breaking the build or letting them know that they've made these mistakes or introduced these security vulnerabilities. So this way they get an understanding of what they need to be doing, and it improves them from a development perspective. So you've moved all of these things that would normally happen at the end of the cycle after all the code's done down into the start of the cycle so that you spend as few dollars as you can to fix the problems that are being introduced at that point. If you wait until the end and do these types of testings, then you're going to get that feedback, and you may determine that the architecture for the platform that you were building is completely wrong, and of course it's going to cost you a lot of money to fix that. Typically what happens at that point, you get into discussions with the SMEs and the business and determine which particular features you're going to drop off because you don't have time to do any of them anymore. The last thing I would like to mention too is follow the safe pillars of success. Go out to the Scaled Agile Framework website, take a look at those pillars. Those pillars really drive success into any IT implementation whatsoever. So that's it for today. This has been Innovating a Game Changer podcast. I again am your innovator, and this has been the Innovation Process Overview.